Okay, thanks. So I'm going to talk about two projects that we have funded through JIP. One is expanding markets and through differentiation, new species and product lines, and the other is addressing kelp production distribution challenges. Let me see if I can figure out how to advance this. Okay, great. I've got this is going to be a little tricky. Sorry. So this is a picture of some wild set kelp. We focused, one of our challenges was to try to diversify, or one of our goals was to try to diversify the different species that we were processing at the hub. So farmers were asked to try to grow different species, which unfortunately there was limited success. They attempted to, we collected sorus for three rib, five rib, and split kelp, but the nursery results were not great. So we ended up this year asking farmers to bring in um, wild set three-ribbed kelp, which was typically very abundant on their farms. And we had found that it had market appeal both as a dried and salted product. We also wanted to test whether asking for single species deliveries of wild set was a viable strategy. And unfortunately, the quality was quite mixed and the quantity was not as we had hoped. So our takeaway was that it would be quite challenging to build a business plan that relied on wild set. That said, um, another focus of our grant was diversifying the processing strategies. So we had experimented with salting kelp previously with success. And so this year we scaled up and we moved from using small crates that processed could hold about 10 pounds to processing in fish totes, which allowed us to process about 250 pounds at a time. So that was a good that was a success, I would say. And we ended up salting three species this year, sugar, ribbon, and three-ribbed. And this is a picture of the final product. That's sugar kelp right there. So you can see it really just changes the color and texture of the kelp. Um, we also used grant funds to support developing packaging, testing different packaging, retail packaging for the salted kelp. And we use these heat sealable craft bags, which unfortunately we found that when they were shipped by air under pressure, they leaked. So we had to go back and insert a plastic Ziploc in all of them, which we think is probably only a temporary solution. But we are working with tastemakers on getting it out to other retail outlets. We have it in three retail outlets in um, Alaska, Homer, Fairbanks, and Anchorage. We're also working with different chefs, and actually Tastemaker sent samples to mostly chefs and food writers, and we're just waiting to get feedback from them. We also continued to dry kelp, but we moved away from, we had started our project back in the day, 2022, focusing on using a high tunnel as a more energy efficient approach. But we have found that even though it's more energy efficient, it's much more labor intensive and less reliable because of weather changes. So we dried exclusively this year in the EnviroPack dehydrator that the Salmon Sisters actually own. They use it for fish processing, and that allowed us to dry. Sorry, I don't have the volume, but it was a very effective approach to drying kelp for both food and also we dried some of the residual from the biostimulant in that in the EnviroPack. So moving on, another focus of our project was addressing production and distribution challenges. This is actually the second project, the second grant. And one of those was setting up a more efficient processing line, which we were able to do. Um, this is just an example of where we're working now in the Salmon Sisters warehouse. We had previously just had rolling plastic tables that we had to move in and out in very limited space. And then we were working in a Connex, but now we have a real dedicated space with these nice stainless steel tables. So that's an example of our production. improvements. We also had grant funds to purchase a capping machine. One of the issues we faced with our chili crisp was leakage during shipping. So we did a whole bunch of research, found a company, sent out 50 jars and lids for testing. They tested it, said it would work, sent up the machine, and it did not work. It didn't even tighten the lids. So after a lot of back and forth and troubleshooting, we ended up returning it and hand tightening all of the lids again this year. So hopefully we can find something that will work a little better than that. But that was a disappointment this year. Other work that was supported by the grant was research into different mailing options, which included led us to set up a Rollo account and setting up a direct sales platform on Square and also developing point of sale display materials and recipe cards. So that's just an example of our point of sale materials that we have now in some of the retail shops. Sorry, I'm having a little trouble because I've got two screens here. Another thing that we researched was different containers and fillers for our biostimulant. We decided on these 1 liter stand-up pouches that are lined with the material recommended for acidic liquids. We found that the commercial options for a filler were between $4,000 and $5,000, which was beyond our budget. But thankfully, with our great crew, we were able to design and produce this simpler option, which used off-the-shelf components and was less than $500. This is what the finished products looks like, which we have in 8 farm and garden stores in Alaska and are continuing to do outreach to other vendors. We also used some of the grant funds to support more field testing. One thing I think we've all learned is that farmers are risk averse and that we need to really be able to prove out that the product is of value to them. So we're working, this is the Kenatsi tribe's tomato greenhouse operation. We're also working with the Calypso farm in Fairbanks. We're working with a peony farmer in Homer, a landowner in Nikiski that's trying to reclaim some pasture land. And then these are all sort of informal collaborative trials. We're also working with the Alaska Plant Materials Center in Palmer on potato trials with funds from this grant. And then we're also involved in a more formal trials along with 2 other SEC-funded biostimulant projects testing our seed to sprout product on tomatoes, peppers, and potatoes through an egg testing service in California. Finally, we end up with a the solids after we press out the liquid biostimulant, and we successfully marketed our dried kelp solids to Ocean Made, which is a Seattle-based company making kelp seedling pots, which is what's shown on the left. Unfortunately, the dryer that we leased for that work under a separate grant shorted out on arrival due to an electrical problem. And we were not able to, we had to postpone that work and potential sale until hopefully next season. We also continued conversations with Dr. Vineyard at UAF, who's testing kelp solids for animal feed, and Jessica McKay and Dr. Farzadnia at the UAF Advanced Materials Lab, who are testing the role of kelp solids as a component of an alternative concrete formula. Thankfully, we were able to sell most of the solids to local farmers for compost at a reduced price, because that is one of the big challenges we face when we make biostimulants is what do we do with all of the solids? Um, so that is all I've got. So please, any questions?
Thank you so much, Catherine.
Yeah,
As always, there's a lot going on over with the
yeah.
Catholic Kelp Hub. It's exciting to see the progress, and it sounds like there's been a few challenges this
Oh,
year
we
as well with different machines. Have you have you been able to look into another capping machine, or did Barnacle come out to see you all? I wonder.
We've talked with them, we've had
Yeah.
some back and forth with them, and I know they've been very forthcoming in sharing their experience, but I don't know that we've actually found out their brand yet. But we've had a dialogue with them, and they said it's not, even the one they have isn't a perfect solution. But this one, it didn't even, like, the lids weren't even tightened at all. I don't know what the issue was. It was really bizarre because we had sent down 50 jars and lids, and they had tested it and set it up supposedly to work with our lids
Mhm.
and jars. But yeah, we'll keep working at it because it really would be, it's just partly for labor saving.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're going through all of the various product development, is there one or two that's emerging as ones with most demand and lowest labor, or do you think that you'll continue to make all of these different products, or just
That's a
looking
good
ahead?
question. I mean, we're really looking at our business model and where does it make
Hmm.
sense to put the emphasis. I think the salted kelp is the one that right now it's very labor efficient. And what is challenging is that it's a newer product. I think most people are used to kelp in a dried form, either dried or fresh, and it's somewhere in between. So we're really hoping that this outreach to different chefs will pay off. There's some local Homer restaurants that are really into it, buying, like, 50 pounds at a time to use in their production. So it does have real versatile use. It's just a question, I think, of expanding that marketing and hopefully getting some early adopters and some momentum on that. But I think that's the one of the food products. The biostimulant, we're definitely still going to be pursuing that. I think we've got some really good results coming in. The and as far as the what to do with the residual, I think, there's promise in both the animal feed and it's really exciting to see what they're doing at the Advanced Materials Lab.
Yeah.
And the nice thing about them using the residual is that it's a waste product. They're not basically having to buy kelp that could otherwise be used for food.
Hmm.
Um, but because it's fermented, it's a different composition some than straight up kelp that they would be buying. But we've sent them additional samples for them to work with. So that would be really exciting if that went somewhere.
Yeah, that is exciting. Abizer, go ahead.
Yeah, hi, great presentation. A question on the salted kelp. Is that ambient temperature, refrigerated, or and then how do you guarantee food safety of that?
Yeah, we sent it to the Kodiak lab. Um, Peter Hemmel, I'm always forgetting how to pronounce his name. Hemmelbaum did some testing. He and Chris Sanito tested it for
Yes, yes.
shelf stability. So basically, it is shelf stable. The salt makes it so that no bacteria can thrive. And they tested it both vacuum packed and open. And in both cases, it was found to be shelf stable. So we haven't fully determined how long. And so we're recommending 8 months. That's what we put as a sell by date. But we want to continue testing that. I think it's still probably safe, but the texture does start to change a bit after a longer period of time. But I've kept some in my refrigerator for years and it's fine. So I think, but we wanted to get it out in stores on the shelves, not in the refrigerated section. It's just so much harder to have to ship and maintain cold chain and also to get refrigerated space in a shop. And it's not necessary. So yeah.
And are you doing it across all species or just the sugar kelp?
We've done
Or
it with sugar kelp, ribbon kelp, and three ribbed. And
okay,
actually split kelp. Split kelp is the one that we've been selling to the chefs in Homer.
okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
Any other questions before we move on? All right. Thank you so much, Catherine.
You're
Exciting to
welcome.
hear
Thank you.
everything that you're working on, and yeah, just look forward to seeing all the continued progress. We
Great. Well,
can,
thank you. Thank you always for the support.
yeah, of course. We can move on to Amber Morris with Wild Blue Solutions. She's going to be talking about her work with reshaping the future of plastics and working on kelp-based bioplastic pots. Hi, Amber. Oh, you're still on mute.
Hi, good morning, everyone. This project's had some hiccups, but I'll share with what's going on at the moment, which is a couple weeks ago, I was wondering if it was going to have to be called, but it looks like we're going to be able to move forward. So Reshaping the Future of Plastics is a collaboration with Wild Blue Solutions and Biotic Labs, which is based in Israel. I'm not sure, do I share the background of the project as well and its goals, or is
Yeah,
it's developed?
you can share a brief background and goals and sort of where
Where
you're
it's
at.
at.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Your phone's on, so it's not as loud.
what's that?
Oh, I think someone just might have not been on mute. You can keep going.
Okay. So the goal of the project is Biotic has a fermentation process where they can use kelp, seaweed, and other like natural biomass to make PHBB polymer pellets that are fully biodegradable pellets made for injection molding. This project, I collaborated with Bloom Living, which is the largest horticulture manufacturer of injection molding in the United States, and Biotic using their pellets and to make 4-inch horticulture pots, mostly to proof of concept and to get it into the United States and to try to help facilitate a biorefinery for Biotic and to have some testing. Obviously, Israel has been in a pretty unstable situation since the funding released. And so we've been kind of playing it by ear with that. They have a piece of machinery that was stuck in Iran. They haven't been able to get that piece of machinery, but they are producing pellets at this moment. So luckily last week I had a Zoom meeting with Adi, who's the CEO of Biotic, and corresponded with Ryan, who's the CEO and president of Bloom, and we're set for October. And I believe, Alex, you had said that I could get the extension to the end of November. So at this moment, it looks like the project will be moving forward, which I'm very happy for. It will be a smaller amount of pots, so I won't be selling it. It'll just be the proof of concept. I'll still be flying to Florida to look at the injection molding while the engineers mess with this new polymer that they're not familiar with. And then I still have pots at the end. I dropped it down to about 40 pounds of pellets of just trying to take some of the pressure off of Biotic so we can get them here. And yeah, that's where that project, it doesn't sound exciting, but I'm actually excited because it's been so back and forth with what's going on. Like one of their lead engineers was pulled into service and, and so it's just been, but one of the cool things, I guess, if that's the way to look at it, is that part of the project too is sending stabilized kelp to Israel. A few years ago, we had sent, Wild Blue had sent sugar kelp. So they knew that that was compatible. But this year we sent sugar, split, and macrocystis. And they luckily covered the shipping costs because they were astronomical. But that arrived a couple weeks ago, and now for the pellets, it will actually be the kelp from Alaska that's going to be used, not necessarily to make all the pellets, but a good portion. And that wasn't the case before because I would have been getting the pellets before they had received the kelp. So I think that that's actually, an accidental positive change because it is nice to actually be able to have the product made with Alaskan kelp from the project. And also what will be in the report is their different testings and compatibility of all the 3 different species, which they're currently doing that at this very moment.
Thanks for
So,
sharing, Amber. Just kind of looking to the future, if these trials are, you know, successful and the pellets have the right quality for these injection molding pots, like how do you see this project moving forward and potentially impacting the industry more broadly? Like the potential for scale, I guess.
well, I think it would be looking for funding for a biorefinery in Alaska. I mean, that was kind of what I've been doing for the past couple years, and I wasn't making any headway. And so then it became to making a product to try to help facilitate, so people could have something in their hands that's tangible. So yeah, I think there's great promise. I honestly think there's just been logistical issues. But yeah, to me, it's what the reason why I became a kelp farmer was for bioplastics and projects. And so I'm very excited about it. I think it's biotic. I met them actually at a conference and RD at a conference in Maine, and they were the first people that I spoke to that really understood that in remote communities, the processing and biorefining needs to happen on site. And so that's always been the goal. And whether it's Cordova or wherever else in Alaska, it depends on how much volume we're producing in Cordova. I don't know if now it would be the best place. But I've always appreciated that because it seems to be lost, I would say, on the majority of people that are outside of the actual specific farmers, that they don't really realize you can't be shipping all this stuff everywhere if you're going for lower price points. And so I think there's a really great future in it. But as everything with the kelp industry, it's going to depend on us bringing costs down for growing the kelp itself and making more than one product off of low cost items. And that's goes into the other small JIP that I was awarded to, because those can actually complement one another quite well. And I think none of these, perhaps food, maybe none of the lower cost or standalone products in my mind. They have to be fragmented. And then there's a great future, I think, with the biotic collaboration.
Mm-hmm. Do you know because they're extracting the alginate from, like, is there a lot of waste in like different residue from what they're using to make the pellets? Are you aware of that process?
It's a fermentation process, and from my understanding, they would be the last end of it. So in our discussions, it would be like whether it's a biostimulant that comes out first or extractions for, fucoidin or what have you would come out first, and their stage would be the final stage of that their enzymes are targeting the remainder of the carbohydrates and such like that. I was able to actually send them some dried kelp that had extractions taken out as some that didn't. And I think that's important so they can look at the different levels of if that works. Because if it works for them to have one that already went to the screw press, then you're already looking at that. But from my conversations with Adi, they can use it after a biostimulant, and they've tested for stuff like that. On what level, I can't be 100% sure, but this will answer a good bit of questions from just the testing we're doing right now, or they're doing right now. I'm not going to take credit for that because I'm not doing that testing.
Are there any other questions from the group here?
I just have if you have time, I'll ask. Otherwise, we move on. I just had a practical question on once you do make the bioplastic, what's the properties and how does it get used? Does it like mimic a plastic bag, or is it gonna be like, years ago we developed like a corn packaging and glasses and cups, but they had limited, they would not withstand hot temperature and all that. So just kind of wondering if kelp, where's the future of the plastic products made from kelp or bioplastic?
Well, I guess I can't answer that to the full spectrum because that would be more of to go deep into it would be probably more of a question for a specialist of biotic because it is more, but what I would have been testing, now I'll be testing this outside of the parameters of this funding opportunity, is the breakdown. This is a thicker horticulture pot, so it isn't a single use. It will be multiple, but it would end up having an end life cycle. So Biotic, I believe, has tested with different car companies. Toyota, I believe, is one of, they've tested, they've had a lot of people they're partnered with that are testing, but it's not for things that you want to last 20 to 200 years. You know, it is for things that say it's going to withstand longer. I'm familiar with the corn bags that you're talking about. So I think you could make it a thinner one of that, or things that are thicker. I think they're going to have different applications, but none would you be looking for a forever plastic. Not anything of where, you know, you're not going to want it for your fuel tank, you know, that you're carrying around. You know what I mean? I think it's going to have its spots that it suits and its things that it doesn't, you know. But I encourage anyone who's interested to look up Biotics. They have a gorgeous website. Answer any more specific questions. By the end of this thing, I'll have a report that has more details, but more specifically of the data that they're looking into and the pots that was created and the temperatures that were used to create those pots. It won't be going into the full scope and spectrum of the capabilities. You know, I think that my goal of getting this in here is I had a meeting with a big billion-dollar like shipping plastic company in the United States. I think they're the largest independently owned one. And it was, I think, about a year and a half ago. And they said they weren't interested in coming onto this until there was a product at hand and Biotic was in the United States. And I said, okay, well, I'll start working on that then. And so the bigger goal of this to me is getting big players interested and having them participate. You need those bigger players to become interested. You know, I don't see any of this being successful if we're just pigeonholed with these very small groups. You know, I think it has to be opened up to a lot more people. And that was the feedback I got from not the president of that company, but their under person. And so I followed what that direction is. Or I'm trying to follow that direction.
Great. Thank you so much, Amber. Appreciate you sharing. And yeah, hopefully there's not too many road bumps and we can get it finished. Yeah, before end of November. All right. Is Lexa here? Yes, she is. So we can move on to Lexa Meyer. She'll be sharing on the project of advancing value-added mariculture development and testing of kelp dumplings.
Awesome. Great. So I hope I'm in presenting view.
Yes, you are.
Awesome. Great. So Lexa Meyer with Alaska Ocean Farms. I know most of the faces in the room. We are basically a sole proprietorship, but an LLC. It's myself and my husband in Kodiak, Alaska. We've been farming kelp here since 2017. And we just wanted an opportunity to explore some, value-added food products, get kelp out there and just see what happens. We've spent a lot of time waiting for markets to come to us as kelp farmers. So we thought, well, heck, let's see if we can drum up a little bit of business with a value-added food product. And if anything, maybe just start the conversation around the possibilities of kelp, what it can go into. And I also like the idea of taking kelp and turning 10,000 pounds of kelp into $10,000 versus 10,000 pounds of kelp being, $3,000. So, I think that there might be a higher price point with value-added food products as kelp as an additive. And so, yeah, we were excited just to start playing around with some ideas. We picked up the dumpling idea because A, I love to make dumplings. B, they have a broad appeal cross-culturally. Most people are familiar with everything from a tortellini to a, Japanese gyoza or pot sticker. And they make really good, like packaged and frozen convenience foods. They're easy to prepare. There's something that packages and ships well, though they do have to remain frozen in shipping. But again, something that you can boil a pot of water, throw them in, and you've got dinner on the plate in a matter of minutes. So easy preparation, also a thing. And what we know about American consumers in general is, man, do we like our convenience food. As we start working more and more, and we have both people in a household working, nobody's there preparing meals all day. convenience foods really are the way to go. And how can we do something that's, a little bit on the healthier side too, not fried, all of those things. Incorporating Alaskan seafood was also a big, push for us. So adding codfish to the mix. Kodiak is renowned for its ground fisheries. And we featured codfish from Shunak's Wild Source. So there are one locally operated seafood processor. And the codfish there comes from hook and line fisheries, single fishermen going out in their boat. So we're very happy to also bring in a portion of the product that supports another maritime industry. So we had a lot of stuff up and going. We had to source some dumpling forming supplies. They don't make those in the United States. So we went to China. And so it took a while for some stuff to get here, had to learn the equipment, then had to develop a HACCP plan surrounding the equipment. So food safety is of the utmost concern. We do have a kill step in that these are cooked, but in the process of making these dumplings, we want to make sure that we're ensuring consumer product safety. We are handling raw seafood in the process, the kelp itself, from the blanching process, freezing and storage. All of that has to be accounted for. And big shout out to the Alaska Sea Grant Program for their assistance with developing that HACCP plan. You have to clean and sanitize equipment. You have to figure all this out. You have to make sure there's no residual sanitate in your food product and all these fun things. So we've been through a big process of just learning how to operate the equipment. And then with equipment operation comes the recipe itself. So this is an extrusion and forming machine. And so you have to get the consistency of the filling and the dough that goes in just right. Dough goes in here, filling goes in here, it squirts a tube of filling through a wrapper of dough, and then presses it in the die at the end. It's a pretty cool machine, but there was a learning curve for certain. And I'll give a little video here of it in operation. Spitting out some dumplings, pretty neat. And this machine works much faster than I can, I'll tell you that. It can produce probably in the vicinity of 4,000 pieces an hour, which has everybody scrambling. So really a cool little piece of machinery there. And then when we have a recipe, I liked it, Alf liked it, folks at the KSMST liked it, but what was the broader appeal of this product and what did people have to say about it? And were we really producing something that had a possibility of selling? Because, hey, people thought it was pretty tasty. So we utilized the taste testing room at the Kodiak Seafood and Marine Science Center. They have these little windows, they open into their commercial kitchen where we were able to prepare the dumplings and prepare samples. They pass this little window here. Folks come and sit on the other side and they got to taste two different filling recipes. One was more processed, so it had more starches and fillers and kind of a smoother texture, and one was less processed with less starches and fillers. Why would you ever do that? Well, codfish and kelp are expensive. So a lot of food products use cheaper fillers to, stretch the more expensive ingredients. And this all has to work with price point and what you can charge. We want to make the dumplings affordable, but we don't want them to taste bad. We don't want to lower the nutritional value. So this is all a process of developing a recipe that sells. And so we had these forms that people fill out. There were two numbers, and you don't just put number 1 and number 2 because people associate one with better than two second. So you just pick random numbers to associate your samples with. They were supposed to write it here. This person wrote it up there. They gave us some demographics like their age and their gender. And then they just ranked it on a hedonic scale. 1 being, I don't really like it. And 7 being, oh man, this is amazing. Right in the middle here, oh, that's kind of not the greatest thing in the world. So, and then just a general thumbs up, thumbs down, liked it or didn't like it. So this was a way to numerically kind of document everybody's opinion on the dumplings. And so we did this in compendium with the Kodiak Kelp Fest. So this was one of the events at Kodiak Kelp Fest, which was pretty cool. We had a great turnout. We had a total of 46 participants. It was actually 47, but somebody forgot to list their dumpling number, so that we didn't know what they had tasted and what the form was referring to. So we had to throw that one out. Overwhelmingly, the participants were female. We had 32 female participants, 14 male. We had participants in range of age all the way from 9 years old up to 81 years old. So we had a really broad selection of taste testers, and the average for the less processed filling was a 5.4. For the more processed with a 5.5, there was no really statistical difference between those numbers, which was really interesting. And the most common rating overall, so the most frequently people rated the dumpling overall a 6, which is really good on a scale of 1 to 7, we feel. And I want to emphasize that we didn't put any other sauces or anything else in the dumpling. It was just a boiled dumpling as it was. So people are really tasting, excuse me, the filling and the wrapper and really getting a sense for that product as it is without any other adulteration. So now we know we have a recipe we can move forward with. Sorry. So where do we go from here? So we will be sending the dumplings away to Midwest laboratories for nutritional profile and nutrient label development. Now we need to work on packaging. Here are some mock-up potential labels. Just thinking outside the box, we came up with our name, Deckhand Dumplings, which we kind of like. Playing around with the packaging and case size. So what would a retailer want? We also feel that there's probably a lot of interest in food service. A couple restaurants locally thought they'd make great appetizers to add to their menu, something featuring both kelp and fish. They're easy to prepare. So if somebody orders them, you can boil them off real quick. So we really thought that, that might be another potential market. We'd like to do an in-store taste testing. The Kodiak Harvest Food Co-op, one of our newest grocery stores here, is having a little end of summer celebration, September. So we're going to do an in-store taste testing and actually have the product for sale. So we'll do some gauging of market potential, price point, things like that through that little sale here in town. And then we'd love to add this to the entries for Symphony of Seafood. So we should be able to do that in time for the deadline. And then I'm also going to bring these dumplings to the Alaska Food Policy Council meeting in Fairbanks. So we've got a little fun fall ahead for these dumplings, lots of plans. Again, we're thinking more of regional distribution within Alaska, not trying to bring these out to Whole Foods or national markets yet, just trying to gauge locally here in Kodiak and then maybe in the Anchorage area what the demand for a product like this might be. So with that, I'll open it up to questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Lexa. These look awesome. I really want to try one.
Come to Kodiak, or hopefully our paths will cross. You'll get a chance to do so.
Are you okay, so you can make 4,000 of these an hour.
In a perfect world.
Okay. Yeah, what is the prep time before that to get everything ready?
So right now, to do a run, it doesn't take very long at all, right? We've got basically an hour and a half in production.
Okay.
What really leads up to it is the filling, but I can make a whole bunch of filling ahead of time. So spend an entire day grinding up codfish, mixing it together with the kelp and the spices, and that can even go temporarily in cold storage for a day or two before we go ahead and do the forming. We're also able to make the dough in advance as well. So both products can be just basically ready to go. So we could have a day in advance of, we run through the whole makeup of the filling and the dough. The dough performs better if it comes to room temperature. So coming in early, getting the dough to room temperature, and then running with forming. It's nice to have 2 bowls to the mixer. I like to freeze the bowls. That way we can keep the filling at the proper temperature while we do the mixing, which is really nice because, you don't want that codfish to go into, the thermal danger range. So
Right.
when I grind the codfish quickly, put it back in the fridge, I've got my frozen mixing bowls, I pull it out and then mix in my spices and fillers. So we've kind of gotten a workflow for this. And then the dumplings are formed, they go on those big trays and then they go in the freezer. So then they're frozen, then they can be pulled from the freezer. It takes about an hour and 10 minutes to frozen in the -20. We bring those out and then we package
Amazing.
and then back into the freezer.
Is this happening at KSMSC or we have a couple
Yes.
chat
So
questions?
again, huge shout out to the Alaska Sea Grant Program and UAF for allowing us to operate in that facility. It's been wonderful. We've talked to other groups around town about once we're done here with the project, where we could continue to manufacture. So I have a bead on 2 commercial kitchens in which that could take place. So one down at the Canna Marketplace and then another actually at the VFW building here in Kodiak. So they have a certified commercial kitchen that nobody's really using.
Amazing. And then Catherine, we were just talking about the fresh and frozen, but do you use fresh or frozen kelp? And then how much does it use per batch?
Totally. So we use, so this spring, we brought in about 400 pounds of raw kelp from our farm. It was washed, sorted, and blanched. Then it was placed into freezer bags, whole leaf, vacuum sealed and frozen. So we're holding it frozen. It is then thawed, it is diced to the right size in a food processor, and then added into the mix. And we're only using about, roughly a cup and a half of kelp to, 2 or 3 pounds of filling. So it goes a long ways.
That's great.
Because we feel there's a limit to how much kelp you can put in and still make the product thoroughly enjoyable.
And what species is that, Lexa?
We're using sugar kelp, Saccharina latissima.
Okay. And do you have a price point idea for these at this point, or is that still under development?
It's still under development. We're going to, again, I've got the numbers on what it takes to produce, so I know how much it costs me per dumpling roughly now. And that's what we're going to play with when we have our little food night at the Harvest Food Co-op. And we're actually going to take a survey, and hopefully we can get people to walk out the door of them.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Do we have any other questions? And yeah, Alexa, I can pass on any further info on the Symphony of Seafood if you have any questions about the product entries.
Yeah, it seemed very clear. Just wondering if you had dates yet for the Symphony of Seafood. I think, of course, we'd like to attend, and then there's one other person from the region that was interested in a seaweed-based product entry and attendance.
Yeah, so it's the Friday of PME, which I think is November 17th.
Okay.
November 20th.
November 20th. Thanks, Maddie.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. That's important to know.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Lexa. This is exciting, and I can't wait to try one. If hopefully it's before November, but if not, it will be in November.
Yeah. Oh, they're pretty good. So we'd like to come. I think that Seward was trying to plan like a Kelp Fest sort of thing. We'd love to
Cool.
come there if the opportunity arises, if that happens this fall. Cordova was talking about a seafood slash, mariculture product festival, but it sounds like that was going to take more development. So they kind of put that idea for now. We were going to take them there. So definitely we're keeping our ears open for potential places to showcase these.
Okay, great. Yeah, I'll definitely keep that in mind as other events pop up. Okay, well, the last presentation of the day today, we have a Beetzer with Four Corner Foods presenting on the JIT project, reducing impact of heavy metals in seaweed to address barriers of growth.
Yeah. Hey, is my screen being shared right now? Can you see
It
this?
is, but we're seeing multiple screens here. I see unlocking Alaskan seaweed markets,
Okay.
and then
Let
I
me
think if
go back here and
it's a very wide screen.
share. Okay.
There we go.
Is this better?
Yes, we're not quite in presenter mode. So but we are just on the slide screen now. There we go. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, yeah, I think this project was mainly let's go through the business context as to why this project and what the objective was. So I think the idea was to kind of remove the barriers to growth, and one of them is that the naturally seaweed has high levels of heavy metals and iodine. And because of that, large scale consumption, because the regulatory limits are limited. So our idea was to, are there some best practices that if anybody who wants to do seaweed either in a fresh, frozen, dehydrated form, what is it they can do that would increase their consumption limits? So the challenge is regulatory, right? And regulatory, there are some RDA barriers, like how much you can, eat a day. And there's one, this finding, it makes an impact when you read this. The one that says is that consumers currently hit iodine limits at just 2 grams of raw fresh product consumption, and that's for sugar kelp. Different kelp species have different amounts of iodine and heavy metals. So our opportunity is to lower these levels if we can before the consumption. So that was the purpose of this project. And so we evaluated different methods of what we can do. And one of the most common methods, applying it from the food industry, adjacent, and is a blanching. Lexa mentioned a little bit of blanching, but here it is. Blanching is applied to all vegetables before they are frozen or they're further processed. And there's hot water blanching, there's steam blanching that's kind of common in the industry. And our job was to compare these two techniques to see where we can get the highest reduction. And the species that we focused on was sugar kelp and ribbon kelp. That was one objective. The second one was dehydration. So if you make a dried product, do you want to just dry it, or do you want to just, put it through a blanching step first to reduce a lot of these potential, amounts that restrict consumption, and then dry? So that was the purpose. And then quick look at what the RDA limits were. So I'm going fast, but here's what we found. That when you do hot water blanching versus steam blanching, you find that you can reduce a lot of iodine in hot water blanching. It kind of leaches into the water turns brown and stuff like that. Similarly with arsenic and cadmium, you do get a fair amount of reduction of those heavy metals compared to steam blanching. On another heavy metal, lead, which is also significant, the surprising finding was that we actually concentrate the lead. Now, this probably happens. Some of the other solids, which are water soluble, also come off. And so the resultant percentage of lead that doesn't come out in the water kind of remains. And so it increases the content. But I'll come to that in a second because there will be a key finding that will help, what happens if lead concentration increases. So the finding here is that hot water is kind of the clear winner in this case for iodine and heavy metal reduction compared to steam. Although you can use both, depending on what your energy is, the hot water gives you a much more reduction on seaweed tissue. The issue with lead is that it increased, right? However, one of the insights is that when you go into the next level, which is the recommended daily allowances and Prop 65 on how much lead is allowed per day, you find out that despite the concentration increase, the limit that you're going to reach with iodine is going to be much earlier than the limit you reach with lead. So even with its concentration, you're still okay with, continuing to work with that product and then staying within the iodine limits, because otherwise you're going to be increasing on one limit, but then still be higher and lower on other limits because they're not all the same. This one's just kind of saying that, look, when we do a dehydration step, the two scenarios were one, that you do one without any pre-blanching step, and the other one you do with a blanching step. So if you apply blanching, then you can successfully get 58 to 73% iodine reduction, and then you can get 40 to 46% arsenic reduction. If you don't, then it'll just stay whatever content there was in there will just remain. So there's no reduction. But the lead concentration again increases, but I kind of repeat this insight, which is that despite the concentration, the lead remains below the governing limits, which are first exceeded by iodine and then other things. So the important thing on dehydration, this is something really important, because if you just take a kelp and you dry it, there's something called a drying ratio, which is actually the yield. So if you look at sugar kelp, without any kind of pre-blanching step, the ratio is 17, which is wet to dry, which means it takes 17 pounds of wet to make 1 pound of dry. However, if you blanch it, then you lose some soluble solids also in the water. So now when you dry it, it's going to have a higher drying ratio. So what happens here is the comparison. On a blanched sugar kelp, you get 28 so you need 28 wet pounds to make 1 dry pound. So there's a huge impact on yield. And similarly for wakame, you see a 13 wet to dry yield on a non-blanched product, but a 21 wet to dry yield on a blanched product. So this is where it's a business decision, not necessarily right or wrong, but it's a business decision on what a processor would choose. The impact of that is you're going to see in the next slide. So again, coming back to if you're marketing this on a wet basis, like fresh or frozen, then if you were to sell a raw kombu, a maximum daily allowance limit for iodine is going to be reached by just 2 grams of consumption. But if you blanch it, now you can sell 25 grams of consumption. So there's a huge increase in marketability if you blanch your product first before you reach the regulatory limit. And same thing with ribbon kelp, wakame. And there you go from 6 grams or 6.5 grams of raw to about 51 grams of blanched consumption before you reach your daily limit. So that's a huge marketability increase. On a dry basis, it's lesser, but it's still there. You get about 2.5 times increase in salability, and for sugar kelp, and a 3.5 times salability increase on ribbon kelp. So this is where the economic analysis and the balance comes in. You could sell your product with no blanching, but you can only sell 0.37 grams per day daily consumption. So however much you put in your finished product, it shouldn't increase a daily consumption level of 0.37 grams. But if on the other hand, you sell a blanched and dehydrated, you can sell up to 0.9 grams, so about 2.5 times more. This makes a difference because every little bit counts when you're doing multiple long millions of packages, because in a let's say you're making a spice mix, the spice mix that you add in whatever you're making is only like 1% or 2%. So if this is a component of your spice mix, the amount of kelp in there is going to be very, very, very little. And so these weights will that's the math a business person has to do to kind of figure out what is really best for them. Do we or do we not? And like I said, there is no right or wrong. It's a choice that someone has to make based on the economic impact and how this reduces. So these are just a couple of other things. There is obviously variation. These are not exact results, but these are based on certain trials. And, lab standards, variability, sampling frequency, all are going to have an impact on some of these findings. But as a result, as a proposal for industry best practices, for people wanting to use this in the food industry is to try to standardize the blanching process. And if you were, then I would use hot water blanching because that's the most effective. And then it also gives you a huge market potential because it gives you, 10 to 15 times or 14 times more than if you were not to blanch this as a consumption amount limit. And for dehydration, I've said this before, it's yield versus marketability. You have to pick. Is there which way is it more economically benefit for you? Is it more beneficial to get a better yield, but then sell less, or get a lower yield, but be able to sell more? Which way does the equation work out? And what works for a particular application? It's not going to be the same for all applications. It's going to be different for different ones. So I think there's some further work left, a little bit of, want to just confirm results, do more of this work, conduct more on high consumption products, some economics and outreach. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. I do have pictures if people are interested, but other than that, welcome any questions.
Thank you so much for sharing, and especially for the data representation and the graphs. It's all really promising results, and I welcome any questions. You can add questions into the chat. One question. Oh, go ahead, Lexa.
Yeah, Abizer, this is really cool. And, thinking towards industry and like someone making a food product like myself, I'm just curious if you think there's enough evidence out there that says, hey, I'm using blanched sugar kelp, the iodine reduction is X, the lead possible concentration is X. I can base, what I'm creating off of these numbers and say, I don't need to do a heavy metals testing for my product. Or would you still recommend doing heavy metals testing on a product that incorporates Alaskan kelp, even at smaller concentrations or fairly low concentrations?
I think that if you know the concentration of these items in your raw kelp, which is either by historical numbers that you have, or just having past tested it, then you can just use math and you don't need to send it for testing. And if your math looks like you're going to be much below the recommend, if you're very close to the recommended limit amount, then you may want to consider sending it for testing. But typically, how we do it in the food industry is that we look if the limit is X, then if you're at like 0.5 or 0.7X, then you don't send it for testing. You just utilize your past results to kind of confirm for yourself that, but you still need to run a nutritional profile. And in the nutritional profile and labeling, you'll have to come up with, what do I state? So if you're over, like say the iodine limit, you can choose to declare that, it's not wrong to declare that you're over the limit and people still buy it. And it's not wrong to declare that there are, lead, even if it's not over the limit. And there's a lot of Asian stores, at least here in the Bay Area, that actually prefer that you put a label that identifies that even if you're not above the limit, and people are just kind of used to it. And in other countries, it's not even considered, like, in Japan, if you tour, you're not seeing any of this on the label.
Right.
But this is United States laws.
Totally. Yeah, the iodine, I think we probably have under control because of the blanching and the low inclusion rate. Just wondering about the lead. It was kind of like you had this really broad range, and maybe we could just specifically focus on heavy metal testing for lead, just as, part of consumer assurance.
Yes. I think also the lead, there's a lot of debate. People say that Prop 65, I'm going by the Prop 65 limit. And then if you don't want to do that and go with some other limit, either Codex or something, then you may have some room. But lead also, just keep in mind, it's parts per billion. So even though the numbers look big, it's still ppb. Iodine is in parts per million, so it's 1,000 times different than lead. So Yeah, so I think it may make sense to first run that kind of calculation exercise that let's say you put in like 5% seaweed into your mix, and then you know that 5% seaweed how much lead there should be, and then see if that is below that part per billion limit from Prop 65. If it is, you probably don't need to test. If it's not, then you want to test and then you want to report.
Awesome.
Yeah,
Thank you
thanks.
very much.
And just so everyone is aware,